This is the first time I'm doing this presentation to a room full of English speakers with no simultaneous translation. I can't blame the translators this time. Well, at least the lectern isn't transparent like the other one, so you can't see what I have up here. Anyway. Good afternoon to all. So my name is David Yang. Thank you very much, Larry, for the introduction. It's a real honor for me to be here today to speak to you all. We are a newcomer, new kid on the block. There's a lot for us to learn here, and I really appreciate Karen's invitation to be and very honored for us to be the keynote speaker to address such a distinguished audience. And thank you very much for your turnout. So, for most of you who are not familiar with our company, PSA is the world's largest container terminal operator based on our equity-weighted throughput. Last year we did about 81 million TEUs worldwide. That basically translates to about 222,000 TEUs every single day globally. More importantly, out of Singapore, where our base we're the largest transshipment hub, touching 1 in 5 transshipment containers worldwide. And so that allows us to have a lot of experience in terms of the complex operations required in terms of connectivity and transshipment operations, getting the goods to market, which everybody had talked a lot about this morning. But that's changing, obviously, in terms of how we do that, and I'd like to share some of our thoughts with you today. So with our flagship operations in Singapore and Antwerp, I am based, as Larry had introduced earlier on, in Antwerp, because in Antwerp it's our second largest flagship operations outside of Singapore. We do about 10 million TEUs in Antwerp alone every year. And our global portfolio today comprises of over 50 coastal, inland, and port terminals in about 18 countries. As a company, we're very pleased that over the last 2 years, we've managed to venture finally into North America as well, participating in, firstly, in an intermodal facility, transloading facility with the Landucci's in Ashcroft, and then eventually Halifax, and a couple of weeks ago in Penn Terminals, Philadelphia. Now, everything in our sector starts with trade. Thank you. No problem, no, just kidding. Train of thought. Everything in our sector starts with trade. The trade patterns today are a result of strong growth that the world had actually experienced over the last 50 years after the post-war through industrialization, globalization, and the rising urban prosperity over the last 3 decades. As I walk through the immigration museum here, it reminds us of where we had actually come from 50 years ago and how tough life was, right? And so I told myself, I'm really blessed to be born in an era of relative peace, and my generation has not seen war, and after all the immigration and had actually settled down. And so we really are the generation that had benefited from all of that. But it continues to change, and it's accelerating. The changes that we have seen in the last 50 years and the speed of which is nothing compared to what we're about to see over the next 50 years, I submit. And as for terminal operators, we need to anticipate these mega shifts and design strategies around them. I would like to highlight 3 aspects that are on our mind. 1, technology disrupts our world and creates trade pattern shifts. 2, advanced manufacturing is changing our world. It's redrawing the manufacturer's playbook. Manufacturing is becoming smarter thanks to new technologies like AI, IoT, Internet of Technology, augmented reality, data analytics. Think of 3D printing. When it picks up, it will account for probably about at least 20% of total manufacturing processes in terms of production. That's going to change drastically in the way we consume, the way we produce, the way we transport. And finally, our world moves from a push to a pull model, with consumers having the real power in our wallets and our clicks. And we talked about consumer voting on their feed and voting with clicks yesterday. Just as I was about to get on the plane to come to Canada from Brussels, my 13-year-old decided that he wanted to sign up for rugby for the first time, and he has no equipment. And I'm panicking because he's got a game. As I board the plane the next day when I land in Montreal, I say he's got no mouth guard, he's got no shoes, he's got nothing, and I'm going to come home to find him without teeth. So here So here I am running around Antwerp, old school, right? Trying to shop for these shoes, and he's a size 38, and I can't find them. And I went from store to store, wasting about 2 hours, and finally coming home with only a pair of socks. after wasting 2 hours. And then I picked up my phone, I went online, there's a Dutch site called bol.com, and they had it, they had the shoe, I ordered it, got on the plane the next day, the shoes arrived at my house an hour before his game while I landed in Montreal. Amazing, right? So push to pull with consumers having the real power, and so next, think about this. You may have seen this picture before. When the fourth industrial revolution was introduced in the WEF in Davos, these pictures were quite popular to showcase the fast pace of change. The picture on the left was taken in 2005 during the, in front of the Sistine Chapel, while people were waiting for the announcement of the consecration of Pope Benedict. In 2013, just 8 years later, we did not just see the consecration of the next Pope, but also a new world order on global connectivity. That's the difference. Let's not miss the woods by looking too closely at the trees, because technology drives production, consumption, and subsequently trade, and often not the other way around. Oh, sorry. So if you look at the, one example I wanted to show here is the electric vehicle. Now I come from a country that doesn't have a car manufacturing sector. And over the last 30 years, we never promoted the car manufacturing sector because each car manufacturing plant, because there are 1,200 parts in a car, requires roughly about 120,000 workers to support in terms of its entire supporting industry. And Singapore just doesn't have the kind of labor to support that kind of industry. So we never ventured into car manufacturing. Something changed in the last 5 years with EVs, because electric vehicles have just 20 parts. And 20 parts that are highly automated in terms of its manufacturing. So you have the battery, you have the wheels, and you have about 20 parts. There's a huge change in terms of the reduction of parts that goes into the vehicle. And as a result of which, Sir Richard Dyson, from the UK, and most of you might know him for his vacuum cleaners, the Dyson vacuum, he has decided to go into electric vehicle manufacturing. And he's also not only decided to take the task to Tesla, he's also decided to put the global manufacturing plant in Singapore. So how do we do that? And I'll show you later on. So, the consumer power revolution is happening, and something really quite interesting caught our eye. That is the speculation that retail purchases through e-commerce, about 35% of which not only are we buying more online, but 35% of it is actually recommended through AI. You're buying stuff that you didn't even think about. You're buying stuff that you didn't know that you need. How many of you in the room have actually watched a movie or watched something on Netflix that you weren't thinking about but was recommended to you, right? So that's happening. And so you may not, so the expectations of trade and requirements of logistics is going to be hugely impacted by this. When by 2030, e-commerce will go up to at least 30% of global retail sales. 2, AI will become a core manufacturing tool. And 3, blockchain will achieve critical mass eventually, and in spite of its challenges and skeptics. In the world of hyper-technology enablement, what will be the implications on our logistics, and what are we doing about it? There's no turning back. Technology is perpetual. I've not seen technology that was invented, useful, released, and then later being canned and tucked away. Now, the maritime logistics environment is still quite fragmented, and with many players along the supply chain, both physical and non-physical. And most of you are in the room today. I don't know if customs is here, but they are a very big part of it as well. So, and everybody has got their own fragmented interests and priorities, and everybody's developing their own systems as well. And we talked about standardization, we talked about the need to converge, we talked about the need to collaborate. Cycle time is important for that as well. But the industry hasn't really quite gotten that right yet. Another reality is that most of logistics chain players are actually very keen for trade sustainability. So it's not just a question of visibility, enhanced connectivity. Sustainability is obviously an important issue as well. Take a look at this. This is a picture of the food trade, which is going to increase. But did you know that aside from the wastage that is caused by production and consumption, the logistics industry is responsible for over $400 million of food wastage every year as a result of inefficiencies in handling, storage, processing, distribution, retail, not just, of course, the maritime sector. But we do play a role in helping this problem. And this is just one industry. Now, Uber has helped us rethink the problem through their ride-booking app. They say it's quite simple. Step 1, 2, 3, you order your car. But actually, in order to conclude the ride transaction, multiple pieces of data are required, like your name, your credit card details, where you are, your destination, and so on and so forth. But look at this. Attempt to map the process flow of a single product container, meaning one product in one container being shipped across various stakeholders. This is what it looks like going from the left to right. Each buyer's bank, forwarder, warehouse, intermodal port, customs, shipping lines, and all that. In fact, the ports and the government are only two actors in this chain. There are many stakeholders that need to be addressed here. And this is basically the event data only that we have to deal with. Let's take a look at the cargo data. And if this is not confusing enough, look at the documentations required going behind this compared to Uber's 6 to 10 data items. It's quite an avalanche. It's quite a challenge. Try standardizing this. We do have a complicated world to deal with. And that's why for us as a port operator, we need to go beyond ports into adjacencies and to have new partnerships so that we can do interfaces better together with shipping lines, with other LSPs, and also to provide resilient platforms, platform structures, platform governance that enable good data inter-usage. Because today, if we don't have good governance of data usage, we end up with a lot of problems. When we talk about adjacencies, we talk about designing new ports in a different way. For instance, in Singapore, those of you who have visited us will know that our city terminals, these were the old terminals, or rather the original terminals in the city, in Pasir Panjang, they don't have an industrial heartland. They're basically located close to the downtown and the financial district. But that's not true for Tuas, which is the new megaport that we're building on this side of the island now. When completed, it's going to have about over 65 million TU in capacity. But it's not just the port. We're not just doing more of the same and consolidating everything into one location. We're going to start with 3 berths in 2021. This is built within the industrial heartland of Singapore as well. And this is where the electric vehicle from Dyson's manufacturing plant is going to go to. So now we're going to have the port actually plugged into the entire supply chain, facilitating the supply chain of the manufacturing of an electric vehicle, and hence leading to the decision of Dyson to locate their plant actually in Singapore. Because now it's not just having the port right in their backyard, it's also us plugging into their whole supply chain requirements and providing the solutions for it also on the digital level. So we want Tuas to be different. We can afford to plan a whole new ecosystem because there's an industrial park all around it. It's not just PSA, but PSA, government agencies, private industrial companies, we're all working together to try and realize this. Let me show you a few of our initiatives that we've done also outside of Singapore. As a supply chain orchestrator. A while ago, PSA invested in a company in China called CURIC. It's really the largest intermodal rail network operator in China with 11 intermodal rail terminals and to be 18 locations over time in support of our existing network of coastal ports that we operated. So up to this time, we were just port operators. We were loading and unloading ships. And for the past 2 decades, as we built our portfolio, going into 40 ports worldwide, there was a holy grail that we were never able to really answer the question or achieve, which is what are the synergies that you can derive from having grown a portfolio of ports around the world? And the answer, if you had asked us 5 to 10 years ago, was we don't know. Because we've just acquired all this collection of ports. They're all doing really well individually. They're all loading and unloading ships, but quite frankly, there's no synergies in between them. And so I think we found an answer as we started thinking about our future, about how we're not going to end up having a Kodak moment 10, 15 years ago if we had continued operating in that way. is to move into what we call Horizon 2, adjacencies, supply chain orchestration, but really more specifically port-centric supply chain orchestration. And then later on, I'll talk about the digitalization part of it as well. So we invested in these 11 rail terminals in China in support of our ports. And one of the first supply chain solutions that we've actually developed is something we call the International Land-Sea Trade Corridor. Let me see if I can explain this here. Now, one of the rail intermodal locations that CORIC had was in Chongqing, the city of Chongqing. Some years ago, the Chinese government decided that the old model of development in China, where all the manufacturing and activities and industrial activities took place along the coast, and where everybody in China tried to migrate to the coast to work, was not sustainable. So they had to develop the inner cities, and a lot of effort over the last 15 years went into developing the inner cities, and Chengdu and Chongqing were two of the major ones. And we visited Chongqing for the very first time, and to our astonishment, we found a city of 30 million people that grew over 15 years. 15 years. Chongqing manufactures 1 in 3 laptops on the planet. 1 in 5 handphones is manufactured in Chongqing. How do you get the products out of Chongqing to the rest of the world? China's a big place. So what they did was they put it on a barge, they sailed it down the Yangtze River towards Shanghai, the largest port, right? But it took about 15 to 20 days to do that. It had to sail past the Three Gorges Dam and make their way down to Shanghai. And so when we took over this rail intermodal network, we said, how can we actually change the supply chain and change the flow? And we happen to have also taken the management and the concession for a port in the south, a little-known port in the south called Qingzhou. And we were cracking our heads, how are we going to fill Qingzhou with volumes as well? Because nobody comes to Qingzhou, right, in terms of major shipping services. Well, it so turns out that it's a 5-day train ride from Chongqing to Qingzhou. So we put it on a train, we sent the container down to Qingzhou, we tied up the Singapore customs to the Chinese customs and created what we call the green lane pre-clearance system. And today, we're able to ship a container from Chongqing down to Qingzhou in less than a week, put it on a vessel to Singapore in about 5 days. It gets to Singapore, 5-6 days. And out of Singapore, it has 5 daily connections to Europe and the rest of the world as well, shortening the supply chain for any laptop coming out of Qingzhou by at least 15 to 20 days. So in that way, we felt that we've been able to influence the flow as a port operator, because 3 years ago, when we started trying to do this sort of thing and we went to talk to BCOs, they would look at us and say, why am I talking to you? You're a port operator. And so we struggled a little bit, and here I really want to take just a moment to thank Canadian Tires for the conversation they're having with us, because we really appreciate it. It's not easy to have like-minded partners and to have those conversations in terms of how together we can actually improve also the supply chain, as well as CN in terms of a partner to facilitate that flow beyond the port as well. Yeah. So that's one example of what we've done. Okay, so we're looking at other opportunities to leverage from that example, other rail connections in other countries as well. In Vancouver, importers and exporters, as you know better than I, can reduce their cost of transloading and complex drayage by using direct rail connections from Vancouver marine terminals into, for example, we believe Ashcroft as a logistics hub. So we bought into Ashcroft terminals. It's 300 acres. It's got plenty of land. It's where the two rails meet. And I think it is one occasion and opportunity where we can actually create a transloading hub that can really change the actual supply chain in Canada. But obviously, we don't know what we're doing. And so we're hoping that the rail operators and all of you can actually help us. So far, I've been told that the steelheads are good for fishing in Ashcroft. But watch the bears. Anyway. So this is going to be hopefully a game changer. Looking at Halifax, so everybody, so Karen told me, well, tell them what you want to do with Halifax. Okay, so, well, some ideas that we have, we also see opportunities to change the logistics and participate in supply chain orchestration here in Halifax, obviously for its good geographic location. And we've also met with CN that has given us some very encouraging ideas, and they're extremely energetic about the opportunity in terms of how they can change the supply chain out of Halifax that influences markets like the Midwest of the United States as well as Chicago as well. So we'd like to work with stakeholders to create efficient inland hubs which connect Halifax maritime terminals by rail, truck, and integrated data flows. We want to work with the shipping lines and rail operators to reach the US Midwest. Big train, big ships is what we're trying to achieve into and out of Halifax. BCOs such as retailers and exporters understand their needs, for us to understand their needs and develop tailor-made solutions for them. And finally, internally, to ensure that the terminal continues to run efficiently and expand in line with the demand, as Kim has actually expressed to you this morning in his presentation for Halterm. Now, to create connectivity and transparency, we have launched a platform called Callista. There are many platforms, as some have mentioned. There are about 5 or 6 gathering steam in terms of traction. There are a few ways in which platforms have been developed so far. Some are vendor-driven, so blockchain, IBM, and driven by actually the adoption of blockchain technologies. You don't necessarily have to blockchain everything, but blockchain itself needs some time to gain critical mass. Then there are some other initiatives that are driven by shipping lines as well, in terms of trying to make their side of the business more efficient. And then you've got logistics service providers like Kuehne Nagel, DHL developing their own as well, but that's really on the fulfillment side. We realized that there was one particular approach to this whole problem nobody has really actually done yet, which is to bring together fulfillment, so your booking and fulfillment requirements, trade regulations and compliance, as well as trade financing, banks as well, all onto one single platform. And that's what we try to achieve with Callista, and by designing a product that allows the physical movement of the container, including bookings and overall visibility of the container in the supply chain, assisting shippers in meeting their regulatory compliance at the same time with all government requirements, and hence we can facilitate the solutions that you've seen going from Chongqing all the way to Rotterdam, for example. So not just the physical fulfillment part, the data fulfillment and the customs regulatory fulfillment part as well. Offering trade financing solutions as well to facilitate the trade financing of these products. It's a combination of these 3 flows that make Callista unique to form other platform initiatives in our sector. But it's an open platform. We like to keep it agnostic. So trade lanes, for example, is gathering a lot of steam and getting a lot of pace. We have no problems with making Callista a part of that as well, so that we can actually tap on their momentum that they've actually built up. As you can see from this slide, PSA is partnering with specialized partners to offer specialized products for specific needs in line with the industry regulations. We're actually looking and studying and trying to get better in understanding specific industry clusters. So electric vehicle could be one of them, refrigerated foods as well, foods and meats coming out of New Zealand for distribution through Singapore for the rest of the world as well. Visibility is key, and visibility and connectivity is key for that. So, it is PSA's belief that ports should become one of the components of the connected logistics community to further increase the overall quality of the global supply chain products. It's not just something that we can do alone. We need good partners like yourselves to think and to see how we could build out a connected community. Therefore, I'd like to invite all of you to engage in the conversations energetically and how we can collectively develop and set up the cargo solutions in order to overall improve the supply chain for its users. I hope I've painted you a picture in how we see ourselves transforming as a company, as a port operator, and the Internet of Things is not sufficient. We actually really need the Internet of Logistics. And so, well, thank you very much for listening.
I don't know about a question, but perhaps a comment. You have a lot of folks in the room, David, who are very interested in your presentation and actually exceeded my expectations, because I think a couple of the things that we have to take away as a port community, you're not a quarter to quarter, you're not looking 6 months out, you're 20 years, 30 years, 50 years out, and I think that represents such opportunity for us. I'd love it if there was somebody in the room that could connect some dots between what our 5-degree granting institutions here that are churning out fantastic data analysts, entrepreneurs, very creative students. I think what you're talking about represents such an opportunity for our community. We have COVE, the Center for Ocean Ventures Entrepreneurs, and how that can connect into what you're doing. I guess, I could go on, but perhaps what I'll do, David, is stop and say, you represent, and you and your company represent just a massive opportunity for this city and this province, and we would love to find ways that we can, work together to get to a higher, better place.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, not many, because we didn't pursue automation for the sake of cost cutting. In fact, automation is a very new process for us for two reasons. One, the technology wasn't ready. Two, we're not pursuing it for cost cutting purposes. And so we wanted to make sure it made sense when it came. It is inevitable. I'm sure you agree in terms of making the increasing productivity and increasing the value-added component in terms of the jobs and so on and so forth, and training people. And also the millennials. I mean, they're not going to drive heavy equipment and cranes anymore, and many of them are growing up in a different environment as well. So it wasn't a rush for automation, and we never pursued that strategy, and it wasn't a race for us. We're beginning to look at automation opportunities where it makes sense. So take, for example, in Singapore, we have a labor shortage in Singapore. We don't have drivers. We don't have crane operators, not enough of them. And we're growing a port, and Tuas, as you have seen, is going to become a 65 million TEU facility. We're not going to have the warm bodies to operate it. So as a result of which, the only solution to that really is automation. And so as a result of which, we're putting a lot of resources in Singapore to actually try and do that. To do that in a sensible way. In Europe, for example, we're in no rush. So in Europe, in most of our terminals today, we still operate by and large in the same way that we did 10, 20, 15, 20 years ago. That itself could be a problem, and we're beginning to see that it's a problem in terms of sustainability because of the aging population in Europe, because of the percentage of the working age population being employed also in jobs today. It's also falling off and plateauing and eventually falling off as well. So we have to anticipate that trend eventually, where Europe itself will also face a labor crunch in that sense, apart from the fact that the millennials are also quite choosy in terms of what they do going forward. So we're really taking that philosophy when it comes to automation. And also, to be really candid, automation is expensive. And we want to make sure that when we actually make the bet, the technology is ready, so that we don't make that mistake where we actually spend the money and cannot automate and then cannot achieve the productive objectives, the productivity objectives, and at the same time create social problems as well. So that really is the kind of a philosophy that we're taking in terms of our approach to automation. I hope I've managed to answer. Thank you. Yeah. Whew. Thank you.